In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. This morning's Gospel reminds me also of how we hear things, and sometimes don't hear the full saying that's being said. Jesus says, "He who has ears, let him hear." In Paul's letter to 1 Timothy, he says that the love of money is the root of all evil. And yet sometimes we hear that and think that money itself maybe is the root of all evil. Similarly, in this morning's Gospel, Jesus reminds us to store up treasures in heaven. And he says to us, reminds us there that it is it's futile to store up treasures here on earth if we're not first rich towards God. And similarly then, we have this, sometimes hear this and think, well, we can't have anything here. Rather, it must all be somewhere else. Much like we sometimes hear that phrase from Timothy saying that money is the root of all evil rather than the love of money. In this morning's Gospel, Jesus reminds us rather to put our focus first on God. That is really where we understand and how we understand our giving to God, our stewardship to God as stewards. Who we are as stewards of God is those who first and give first before doing those other things. And so we give of our first fruits. And so we prepare and we store up these treasures in heaven, and we give richly to God before we think of ourselves, certainly. And this rich man in the parable neglected to do that. Neglected to first put that which he had towards God, but rather could only think of himself. For him, it was the love of money that got in the way, much as it often is for us as well. And so in the Gospel this morning, we are reminded to not put these things of the world first, but rather to put God first, and to let these things of the world come after. This Tuesday, we celebrate the great feast of the entrance of the Theotokos. We'll have liturgy on Tuesday morning, and I hope you are all able to come. But if you're not, we'll talk about that a little bit here this morning. As we see in Mary, one who, unlike the rich man in this morning's Gospel, was able to give of herself first and foremost to God. She was able to, and did indeed, put God first from a very young age. The entrance of the Theotokos that we celebrate on Tuesday is the feast, the celebration of the feast of Mary's entrance in the temple. Not when she was 14 or whatever, just shortly before she gave birth to Christ, but rather when she was just a little child, as her life became dedicated to the one whom she would carry. As she entered into the temple of God, that she might become the very temple of God. We too are called to become temples of God. We too are called to put God first in our lives, to focus ourselves on Him, that we might become temples of the living God. And as we come to church, as we come here to His temple, one could say, we do so to give of our first fruits. Mary's first fruits were her very life. She dedicated her whole life to God that she might become the vessel that would bring God into the world. We too are to dedicate our lives to God, to give first of ourselves, to be true stewards of the gifts that God has given us in our very life, to let ourselves focus on Him, and to store up our treasures with Him, rather than with and for ourselves first. Mary sets this example for us as we celebrate this Tuesday. Mary, as a steward of God, carries God into the world in her very life. And we too are called then to carry God into the world. As we in the church year now think about our stewardship for next year, we do so recognizing the words of the gospel this morning. To not store up treasures for ourselves here on earth first, but to be rich towards God. Knowing that as stewards of God, as we give back to Him that which is already His, we do so strengthening our own spiritual life as well. We do so as good stewards. We do so as a sacrifice back to God, recognizing that all good things come from Him. And as we do so, we prepare ourselves to be temples of God. Our gifts to God in the church is just one of the ways that we give back, and it's just one of the ways that we store up treasures in heaven. We give to Him through our stewardship, giving cheerfully, as we heard from St. Paul just a few weeks ago, to give cheerfully from what we have been given. We also give to Him as we give to those in need around us in our almsgiving. As we approach Thanksgiving and as we soon approach Christmas as well, we do well to remember those who are in need. Those who have not roofs over their heads or food on their plates. And think about how we can give back to God there as well. Our gifts to those around us, just as our gifts in church, are gifts to God, that we might be indeed, as it says in the gospel, rich towards God, giving of our first fruits rather than storing up treasures on earth for ourselves first. And so this morning's gospel, and this week as we prepare for the entrance of the Theotokos in the temple, and as we prepare ourselves for Thanksgiving and our time with family and friends, God willing, we do so ever focusing first on God. Storing up these treasures in heaven that we might be rich towards God and rich towards others. And that in our richness towards others, we might receive the very richness of God that He gives to us through His Son, Jesus Christ, to whom we give thanksgiving and worship and praise with the Father and the Holy Spirit, ever one God, world without end. Amen.